Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome. Just going to take a minute or two just to let everyone in. Good to have you all here. Well, this is great. A nice crowd to start us off.
It's a good crowd. We have a great evening planned for you today.
All right, I think we can begin.
All right,
Uh,
let's kick it off. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to an evening of readings from Here and Now, an anthology of queer Italian Canadian writing being published by Longbridge Books next month. My name is Liana, or Luca Cusmano.
and hi, my name is Christopher Dorado. We're your two hosts for tonight for this pre-launch of this groundbreaking anthology that tackles subjects not traditionally discussed in the Italian Canadian community. Here and Now, an anthology of queer Italian Canadian writing will be published in June, which is also Pride Month and Italian Heritage Month. We'll be giving you a taste of some of the works in the hopes that you might consider pre-ordering the book through Glad Day Bookshop, who is our sponsor or partner for tonight, presenting partner. So thank you, Glad Day, for hosting us on your channels. And I'll be putting the link to the pre-order in the chat.
So, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Chris and I are coming to you live from Jojage, which is what the Kayunkahaga people call Montreal. This place has and continues to be a historical gathering place for many Indigenous peoples, and we're grateful to be a part of a long and proud history of creating and sharing stories on these lands.
Tonight, we will be hearing from Jess Carpinone, Elio Iannacci, Anna Nobile, and Daniel Zomparelli, and myself. But before we get to tonight's readers, we thought we would ask a few questions of Domenico Beneventi, who has penned one of the introductions to the book. Dominic is a professor of English and comparative literature at Université de Sherbrooke. His research interests and publications focus on Canadian and Quebecois literatures, urban writing, gender, and queer studies. He heads the FRQ-SC-funded research team Équipe de recherche en études queer au Québec. Welcome, Domenico.
Hi, Chris. Well, thank you. Hi, everyone.
Dominic, thanks for joining us. In your introduction, you write that this book is a long time in coming. And why do you think it took this long for an anthology quite like this to come together?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of reasons. I think I kind of talk a little bit about it in the introduction. Obviously, the whole question around coming out and being visible and so on. I mean, it's difficult in the general population of Canada. It's even more difficult in certain ethnic communities. The Italian community, for instance, right, is very traditional sometimes. There's very prescribed gender roles, very prescribed, roles around, normative kinds of family and so on. So yeah, it's definitely kind of still taboo. I mean, even before this, I started talking to Licia about this. I was trying to think of writers of Italian origin out there that are visible, and there are very few that are actually that have been visible until now. So I think in that sense, it's important. I also think I talk a lot about this as well. It's also because of the patterns of migration, right? The largest, percentage of people coming over from Italy was in the 1960s. So obviously in that generation, it's completely taboo, 1960s coming over and so on. So it's only their children and grandchildren who really start talking about these kinds of realities, right? This kind of literature is, starting to be talked about and published now. So I think that's those are two of the main reasons I would think. But that's not to say there hasn't been writing in the past, right? So Steve Galluccio, Salvatore Antonio, Chris, other people have been kind of visible, and it's just a handful of writers. Monica as well, I see there, right? So there's very handful of people, but obviously with this this anthology, it really opens up a lot of visibility, I think.
So I'm curious, like Leanna and I were in the film that you co-produced also with Licia Creative Spaces, and we're really thankful for that. It was such I think, I'm going to speak for you, Luca, but like, I know that we've talked about it. It was kind of a really important thing. And I'm curious,
We've
like,
agreed.
Why was this important for you? Like personally, I guess, like to be a part of this project, you know, what made you kind of decide to because the book kind of comes from this initial kind of idea that you had. So why was it important to you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I've kind of danced around this for years and years because when I did my master's degree, I was looking at Italian Canadian literature, period. I was not looking at specific questions around gender. I was looking at language, translation, the return voyage, all of these kinds of tropes that we see in Italian Canadian literature. You know, this kind of divided self and, you know, look at searching for roots and so on. And then like when I got a job and so on, I started working on gender questions around gender. I thought it would be important to kind of marry the two in a sense and look at the way in which gender gets expressed and, you know, sexual difference gets expressed in the Italian community, because it is very specific, right? It is very much still, even for people that are out and queer and so on, family still plays a huge role. The question around language plays a huge role. The question around going back to Italy and figuring out how do you fit in, right? So it's this kind of double kind of minority status, if you will, right? Not only are you, you know, Italian Canadian, so you have this kind of minority status, but then within the community, you have this yet other kind of minority identity that sometimes is not expressed. So in my introduction, I kind of talk about this idea of being in between worlds, you know, like in Italian Canadian literature in general, people have very often talked about being split between two identities. We definitely see this with the kind of writing that's in the anthology, of being split between a kind of a heteronormative identity when you're with your family, when you're with, you know, extended family, weddings and all this kind of stuff, versus your private life, which is very often, if not hidden, at least not really talked about as much, right? So I think this allows for a kind of visibility that you don't see even within the Italian Canadian community.
Well, thank you, Domenico. I think this is kind of a really fun project to be a part of, and we're so thrilled that you could join us here to talk a little bit about it. Uh, yeah, so thank you. Sorry, I think I read your part there, Liana. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to add one last thing, Dominic. I really appreciate what you said about the duality of the here and there, of the different sort of kinds of otherness that so many people feel intersect within them, whether it's, you know, the public and the private. Who are you when you're with, you know, the people that you're out to versus your family? How do different forms of queerness and Italianness manifest, and how do different forms of otherness manifest? I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're navigating the different intersections of our identities. So thank you. Now we get to our first reader for this evening. Christopher DiRado is the author of The Family Way and the Geography of Pluto. Since 2014, he has worked to create a space for LGBTQ literature in Montreal, producing and hosting the Violet Hour reading series and book club. I especially appreciate, Chris, that when you launched and started distributing The Family Way, they came in these amazing little packages with a mug and a postcard, and it was so beautifully put together. And I think you and your partner delivered them, as you said, like a pair of storks to people who ordered them. Yeah. What will you be reading this evening?
So I'm going to be reading from the anthology. I have two pieces in it. One is a nonfiction piece, and I'm going to read that one, well, an excerpt from it. And it's about a series of pictures that I've taken over the years at Gay Pride. I actually kind of like came of age working for Montreal's Gay Pride, and it was kind of like this weird backbone through a lot of my kind of like growth as a young queer person. And so I kind of took pictures that I had taken over the years at Pride parades and kind of tell a bit of a narrative along that. So I'll be reading from that. So thank you. I'll just, here we go. All right, so the story is called Pictures and Parades. There's a picture of me taken at my first Gay Pride parade that is one of my favorites. In it, I'm wearing a vintage red and white baseball t-shirt, ironically, of course, and a black sports cap. I must have been about 20 years old at the time, but I look years younger. I'm standing in the center of the photo, my skinny left hand grasping the straps of a tiny blue backpack, and my eyes are closed, having just blinked the moment the picture was taken. When I look back at the photo now, though, some 26 years later, I wonder if I was blinking. For all around me, there is color and commotion, balloons, bodies, faces, smiles. Perhaps it wasn't a blink. Perhaps as I stood there in the center of all that raging chaos, I was blinded by brilliance, joyful, beautiful brilliance, for I had arrived. I say this was my first gay pride parade, but it really wasn't. I had passed by on my way, my own the previous year. I had read about the Diversité Pride Parade in the Montreal Mirror, seen the photocopied route at the cache of a bar that I had darted into the week before. Almost on autopilot, I woke up that Sunday morning, got dressed, and left the house, not admitting to myself where I was going. I rode the subway into town and then got off one stop before the departure point. Once outside, I walked towards the noise. I headed north along St. Denis Street and then west along Mount Royal to the escalating sounds of music, microphones, and motors. I'd never seen these streets closed to traffic before, but here they were, a concrete carpet that had been rolled out and lay waiting for the city's gay community. I walked the route in reverse and came across more and more people as I did, people with props, wigs, costumes, friends, all heading in the same direction as me. Afraid to go too far, I stopped at one of the corners and, emboldened by the men and women beginning to gather on the sidewalks, waited with them to see what the fuss was about. I'm no stranger to parades. I grew up on Montreal's St. Patrick's Day Parade, the cold green pageant of the city's Irish and Irish for a day. Every year, my family would gather on the corner of St. Catherine and University with spiked coffee and apples and watch the marching bands and horses pass. There would be many photos taken here too, of friends, of family, of strangers and shamrocks. Montreal is a city that loves its St. Patrick's Day, and that included my family. Even my dad, a proud Italian, would happily sport a green derby hat and a Kiss Me I'm Irish badge as he cheered from the sidewalk. But even though I'm half Irish, I didn't get it. I didn't understand how a city or a person's love of all things Irish. How could I be proud of how I was born? And what about this parade and all of its cliches? The green, the gold, the leprechauns. It felt like being made to sit through church, like I was being forced to take part in the rituals and sacraments of a congregation that was not my own. This other parade, however, spoke to me. So strange yet so familiar, it was as if I had come upon my likeness in a window and watched as that boy sat down to eat with another family. Everything was so loud, so tall, so large that I felt dwarfed by it all. How could I have lived in this city for 2 decades and not known that this was going on? And how great would it be to be one of those people, one of the proud ones walking down the street before all of those onlookers? When the parade had finally passed me by, I followed it the rest of the way down. I wasn't bold enough to walk in the street with the rest of the contingents, so I walked alongside it, on the sidewalk. I followed the parade as it snaked through town, down Mount Royal Street to St. Denis, down St. Denis to Charrier, and then along Charrier to Parc La Fontaine. At that point, the trucks broke off, but everyone else kept walking. I followed them into the park, still very much a passerby, and watched as they arrived at their final destination and began to break off into groups to drink beer, eat hot dogs, listen to music, and dance. I looked at my watch. I was late. I was scheduled to meet my friends at a pub downtown for our Sunday afternoon ritual, cheap chicken wings and deep bowls of sangria. But as I stood there, in the wake of what I had just witnessed, I found that I couldn't move. I stood immobile in the grass, in the center of this park that we had all ended up at, and watched as everyone celebrated. My watch felt heavy. I didn't want to leave, but I had no reason to stay. There's a photo of me taken a couple years later. In it, I have blue hair. Jeannie, one of the people in charge of parade security, helped me dye it the week before. I'm sitting outside in the grass, and my head is resting on the shoulder of my best friend, Eric. Around my neck is a laminated pass that tell people who I am. My name is Christopher Dorado, and I'm the publicist for Diversité. Thinking about this now, it does seem remarkable how in just a few short years, I went from wanting to be the proud person on the float to the man whose job it is to throw the party. I still look young in this photo. I'm 23, I'm out, and I'm proud. I tell people that every day during the 5-day celebrations. It's my voice on the radio, my face on the TV, my name in the newspaper, and somehow now this doesn't frighten me. I got the job through my university professor who had been asked by organizers to recommend a student in her class who might be looking for a summer job. Immediately, I said yes. For how great would it be to be part of something so life-changing, so transformative? For the parade had changed my life. That day, years back, after I had finally dragged myself from the park, I went downtown to meet my friends at the bar. Is everything all right, they asked as I stared into my cocktail. I'm fine, I said, usually the talkative one. I'm just tired. Rather, I was distracted. It would have seemed impossible to me the day before, but by the end of this night, I will have told everyone at this table that I am gay. They will be surprised, but they will thankfully support me. Eric will come with me to the parade the following year. He will also take the photo of me with my eyes closed. I will tell my parents too, eventually, before I get the job, and I will save them the trouble of having to tell their friends and the rest of the family by doing it myself in the pages of the Montreal Gazette. Of course, you don't have to be gay to come out to the parade, I'd say in interviews. Not everyone who goes to St. Patrick's Day parade is Irish, are they? Everyone is welcome to the party. I love my job. The happy faces, the scorching sun, the exhaustion. I remember the year that we first choked St. Catherine Street with our numbers, how we weren't sure how many people would show up, and we ended up filling the street with thousands. And I remember the year I came across the AIDS vigil as I walked home at the end of the night, how the people had moved the shimmering candles from the park to the middle of the street and sat by them, staring into them, looking for their friends and former lovers in the light. There are no pictures of these memories, but the images are burned into my brain. Thank you. All right, so warmed up the crowd. Here we go for our second reader of the evening, Anna Nobile. Let me just bring you in, Anna. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Anna is a freelance writer and editor whose nonfiction and creative short fiction has been published in numerous newspapers, magazines, journals, and anthologies. She lives, works, and plays in the traditional territory of the Shishal people of British Columbia. So Anna, maybe tell us a little bit, like how was your identity as an Italian Canadian inspired your work?
Well, I think at the beginning of my career, it took up a lot of space, a lot of mental space. It seemed the more I wrote about it, the more I guess I was comfortable with the whole thing, and just kind of it just became a normal part of my identity, and I didn't think about it quite as much. That's one of the advantages of getting older.
But you're in this anthology now, and I'm curious, like when you we were approached about it, like what was your kind of thought about being kind of included in something like this?
I think it's awesome. I think it's really great. It kind of speaks to what we were talking about earlier with Dominic about how, you know, it's kind of about time. It's always sort of been on the edges and on the periphery. And I have been in anthologies where it's about, you know, Italian writers, Italian Canadian writers. And I have been the only queer person included in that anthology. So it's nice to have an anthology that showcases our work.
So Anna, can you tell us a little bit about what you'll be reading from tonight?
Yes, I'll be reading from a short story called Cleansing.
All right, so the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Before I begin, I want to also thank Glad Day Books for hosting, and Licia, Canton for taking on the work to put the anthology together, and to yourself, Christopher, and Liana for hosting tonight's events. And also to all the contributors who put their words to paper and are sharing them with us. Thank you to all of you, and to everyone who tuned in tonight. Thank you for being here. So my story is called Cleansing. I've stitched a couple of scenes together to create a bit of a through line. I think it will be obvious who all the characters are. Gina stares blankly at the phone. It's highly unlikely that it will ring, but that doesn't stop her from hoping. Waldo eyes the door from his post on the floor. He gives a yawn so big it ends with a quiet yelp, then flops his head back onto his paws. His aspect is less hopeful, but more patient. Gina envies his inability to tell time. The humans in his life come and go, and in between he sleeps, eats, goes for walks, chases frisbees in the park, and barks at the black squirrel that dashes up the maple tree in the backyard. One long, endless stretch, not divided into weeks, days, hours. Abby has been gone 3 days, 9 hours, 22 minutes, give or take. And through all that, Gina has kept her promise, not calling or texting, but waiting for Abby to be the one to reach out. When she left, Abby said she needed some time to sort things out. She was anxious about the business. Her dad wasn't doing so well. She was feeling pressure from all sides. Am I pressuring you? Gina asked, sensing an in, a way to get Abby to talk. something Gina found difficult to do. In her family, everyone talked all the time and all over each other without anyone thinking it rude. Gina was still trying to get used to the quiet with Abby. No, it's just what? Abby scratched Waldo behind the ears. I'm not focused. She held the dog's head and looked into his eyes, still scrubbing his ears and neck. I need to be with myself for a while. Waldo licked Abby's nose gratefully. Gina watched them, her face growing hot while her hands ran cold, Abby's attention on Waldo confusing her. Abby finally looked up. Derek's offered me his place on the island. It'll be a good place for me to clear my head. And with that, she started packing. Derek, Abby's business partner, would mind the store. Abby's sister would look in on their dad. But Abby went without Waldo. They were practically inseparable. Waldo went with her to the store. They ran together at the outdoor track at least 3 times a week. They'd purchased a king-size bed to make room for him. In the moment, Gina couldn't get past the shock of seeing Abby pack. It was only later she realized how strange it was that Abby would leave without her dog. She'd given Waldo a big hug and Gina a peck on the cheek, and she was gone, the door clicking softly behind her. Gina looked at Waldo then, who settled comfortably on his blanket for a nap. He had no idea, therefore no reason to worry. Waldo stands in front of her now and puts his head on Gina's lap, bringing her back to the present. She'd taken him to Trout Lake Park earlier as a treat for them both. Waldo had lots of friends there, apparently, given that the other dog owners all knew him. He'd gone for a swim against her wishes with a couple of the other dogs. He's not coming back, one owner, a large man with a scruffy beard, said with disdain. Gina understood that the disapproval was for her and that she was to stop shouting for a dog that wasn't listening. Now Waldo smelled like lake water that had had too many geese swimming in it. She takes him by the collar and leads him to the tub. It's bath time, Waldo. Maybe next time you'll listen to me? He looks at her, Gina can tell, to make sure she's serious, then jumps into the tub and waits for it to be over. The next evening, Gina nearly drops her mug when the phone rings. Waldo doesn't even lift his head. She'd let him sit on the couch for the warmth and the company. Now she has to negotiate, reaching forward to grab the phone without spilling hot tea on his head, which he's refusing to remove from her lap. Hello? She's breathless, though she hasn't run to the phone. Hey, girlfriend, how you doing? It's Sophie. The only person Gina has known longer than Sophie is her mother, but Sophie knows her better than Gina's mother ever will. Hey, Sophie, you okay? Oh, you know. Yes, Sophie knows. They've seen each other through worse things. Where did you say Abby went again? Derek's cottage. You remember you came with us last summer. Yeah, funny that, because I'm sure I saw her in the West End today. Gina's mind freezes, Sophie's words echoing in the cavern of her skull while her stomach does somersaults. G? What are you talking about? She manages, putting the mug of tea down before she really does drop it. I went to watch a baseball game, you know, the gay league. She was there. You went to the other side of town to watch a baseball game. You hate baseball, Gina retorts, as if Sophie's dislike of the sport proves that what she's saying can't be true. But I like girls who play baseball, Sophie replies. That friend of Abby's, what's her name? She was at your birthday party, wore the plaid shirt that clashed with her hair. It was a tightly woven plaid of pumpkin orange and purple. It was hard to imagine anyone designing something like that, let alone wearing it. But there was Emma with her coppery red hair wearing that shirt, leaning against Abby laughing while Gina sat opening presents. They'd met at a gay bowling tournament, another sport that Gina didn't play, and something Abby had done before they'd met. Emma was new to town, so Abby had invited her to Gina's birthday party, thinking it would be a good place for Emma to meet people. She didn't understand why Gina might not want Emma there, a stranger at a small gathering. They'd spent most of the evening together. She didn't know anyone else, Abby said when Gina brought it up. I thought she came to meet people, but then she doesn't leave your side. Gina couldn't help raising her voice, feeling the familiar relief of letting emotions fly, but Waldo started whining. Abby took him and slept in the guest room that night, leaving Gina wondering how this had become her fault. Softball, Gina whispers to Sophie through the phone. What? It's softball, not baseball, Gina says, irritated. There's a difference. They were there together, G, Sophie says. Abby was watching her play. When she hangs up the phone, Waldo looks up from the couch expectantly, as though waiting for a full report of the conversation. She is tempted to tell him everything, about the knot growing in the pit of her stomach like a rotting pearl, about Abby coming home late, then getting up early instead of lounging with her in bed, even on weekends. Taking Waldo with her everywhere, but never an invitation for Gina to join them. The way they sat silently watching TV instead of going out somewhere, anywhere. Things she hasn't been able to tell anyone, not even herself. Waldo licks the generous tears from her cheeks. His hot doggy breath and the thought of his germs crawling on her face make Gina recoil. She grabs his collar and pulls him to the bathroom, each stumbling over their own feet. She can barely see what she's doing, allowing her to avoid looking at him as their momentum carries them forward and he jumps into the tub rather than crash into it. He tries again to lick her, gently, a couple of times, but that just makes her scrub him harder. He whimpers a little at first, but then he lifts his head out of her way. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Anna. That was
Thank you.
beautiful. Our next reader this evening is Elio Iannacci. Elio Iannacci is a writer, poet, and arts reporter for Maclean's. He writes for the Globe and Mail, the Hollywood Reporter, and the Toronto Review of Books. His award-winning profiles include Sophia Loren, Barbra Streisand, Lady Gaga, Joni Mitchell, and Beyonce. He was a juror for the Dane Ogilvy Prize dedicated to LGBTQ+ authors. Hi, Elio. Thanks for being here this evening. Some names that pop up or that pop out in your bio are Sophia Loren and Lady Gaga, who's also, of course, Stephanie Germanotta, right? And both of her parents are of Italian heritage. So I'm wondering how your Italianness or your Italian Canadianness informs your creative writing versus your reporting and other people that you interact with.
I see it as all the same. I think writing for me, whether it's a profile or it's a short story or a piece of poetry, it really is very much the same process. So you're constantly looking for heroes, and I found none. So when you're a young person coming out as queer in a certain generation, it's hard to find them. So you look elsewhere, and particularly for the queer community, you find them on the dance floor. Luckily, I was able to go to Rome, and I found two that started driving my work, Pier Paolo Pasolini and Dario Bellezza, which both, in my opinion, are very similar to Lady Gaga and Sophia Loren in many ways because their style is quite decadent. So that cinematography, that pop culture-ness, it all sort of informs everything I do.
What will you be reading for us this evening?
I will be reading an excerpt from a story called Low Country Suite. And so I should preface this quickly by saying it doesn't sound like an Italian story. The main character's name is Levi Craver. However, his grandparents immigrated to Savannah, Georgia, and quickly changed their names to Craver. It took from Cavallari to Craver in an effort to dodge racism. So I didn't even realize this, but the new Anglo-Saxonized last name includes the word crave. I suppose they were craving acceptance. I'll start. Low Country Suite. On his first day off in 11 weeks, Levi Craver decided it was mercy time for his legs. Looking out the window of his house, he knew the Spanish moss gnawing on the front lawn needed clearing up. The clumps of debris coming from 13 trees outside Wilkes Square told him that Savannah had finally submitted to fall. He shook his head and thought about how the burgundy brick streets would clutter up with leaves and look like the linoleum floor at Lindsay's hair salon, strewn with blue rinse follicles from the old Biddy regulars. No matter how many times Levi swept them, Lindsay's floors looked speckled with gray hay. The sun was still enjoying an extended happy hour, and Levi couldn't believe it was already 1 o'clock. The combination of time and heat made Levi close the case on any yard work and head to the fridge. Having no drink in palm at this hour seemed senseless, especially in this neck of the woods. His next door neighbor, Jordan Sachs, was already rattling off a few curses around the parquet. With a mouth that was guaranteed to be at least 70 proof, the man was too loud to ignore and too sad to approach. On the first Sunday of every month, Jordan could be counted on to be spastic for a good couple of hours. The man would vault off a long whiskey-induced one-man parade in the quietness of Wilkes Square in a way that spooked the children off the entire block. When Levi's mom was alive, Jordan's hollering would inspire a crock of bad jokes. "That'll be me in 10 years if I keep working for Lindsay," he'd say during these particular Sundays. And his mom would dole back a version of, "Keep pouring, son, and hopefully with enough honey whiskey, Jordan will sound as sweet as Pavarotti." "God damn you, Savannah, you took away the only pure thing about this town." To Levi, Jordan's screaming was considered a worn-out novelty. His voice was already something that made the squirrels edgy, and the tourists so scared they looked like they needed their diapers changed. Levi sat on a wicker chair on his balcony and saw a nice Yankee family take photos in the parquet gazebo. Everything was as quiet as vines until Jordan's belting fired out from his side of the street, and all Southern charm was damned to hell. "Run out of here before Satan takes your soul too." The way the visitors bolted back to their hotels made them look like they had hot coals in their socks. In the early days, the neighbors forgave Jordan Sachs's crowing. They almost approved of his opera because his case was just so sad. Hearing him yell for his dead son gave the whole square a sense of communal heartache, especially when Mr. Sachs wailed and wailed when he reached the patch of grass where the police found his little boy's teeth. "The town needs to repent. Damnation will burn us all down." Oh, the good people of Wilkes Square tried to keep Jordan's claptrap tempered. Shirley Coastal of the Coastal Cleaners family was always sauced by noon, so she'd react first. Shirley would almost fall out of her bedroom window, slurring, "Jordy, he's been gone for almost 20 goddamn years. Just deal with it, honey. It's God's goddamn will. Sugar, you're ruining God's day of rest for the rest of us. Jesus doesn't forget blind eyes." Loyola Granger, who had a house on the west side of the square, took a different approach. She called the cops. Of course, the Blue Boys never came. Mr. Sachs was a former deputy, and the local squad never stopped feeling remorse for the man since nobody could crack his son's case. That didn't stop Loyola Granger, though. The woman, somehow in the throes of her umpteenth martini, found the spirit to knock on Levi's door with a peach and pecan casserole in one hand and a clipboard with a petition on the other. She got the whole neighborhood railing against Mr. Sachs's jabbering and writing. Levi took the casserole and looked at the united grievance. "Man, we both know I did not finish high school," Levi said with a tone that was both cordial and annoyed. "You know, I just wouldn't feel right signing this official document. I don't even know what civil disobedience means." When he closed the door, Levi smirked into his tumbler and shook his head. Those tacky tourist bars on River Street named his libation "Call a Cab" on their menus because of how much it could impair you. Levi eventually went back to the balcony to watch the northwest side of the square. Weary nurses from the old age home pushed their ghostly chargers and wheelchairs. Acorns tumbled down from the trees. The blazing September sun splayed in tiny pockets of light into the bushes. It almost made him forget that his crazy neighbor was banging his fist into the bark of a sycamore in front of his house. "We're all gonna burn, we're all gonna burn." A trio of municipal leaf blowers started working nearby, bringing their wind guns to hose down the 4 paths leading to the pagoda. They made so much noise, Mr. Sachs's choruses were shrunk down to hisses, and Jordan ran off. At 2:30, a wedding party spreads out, and Levi quickly notices it as some shoddy, Gone with the Wind themed affair. A group of annoyed bridesmaids strapped in faded costume shop corsets and bonnets quickly leave the bride's side and sneak off to smoke some Mary Jane. A catering company team snickers as they unfold chairs and tables on the grass. An overweight Rhett Butler lookalike shows up and helps guests to their seats. A rush of plastic champagne flutes filled with sparkling peach wine is trayed up and passed around before the procession. Scarlett O'Hara's nasty girls start to giggle, but then pull it together for the walk down the red and ivory velour aisle. Levi thinks it's far too Christmassy for a fall wedding. Then the bride comes out and her hair is bright orange, which immediately makes Levi shake his head and mutter, "Miss Clarence strikes again." He almost shouts, "Ma, come get a look at this," but catches his throat before it opens. Instead, he picks himself off the balcony and heads over to his next door neighbor's house, hoping Mr. Sachs has piped down and is up for a visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Elio. Wow, wonderful characters. I know that's probably not supposed to make me want to have a drink, but it makes me want to have a drink. Very cinematic. So thank you so much. All right, we're moving quickly. We've got 2 more readers for you this evening. Our next reader is Jess Carpinone. Jess Carpinone is a baker by trade and has always owned and operated a bread bakery and cafe since 2013. She's turned to writing at every stage of life as a means of self-discovery and expression. She lives in Ottawa on unceded Algonquin territory with her partner and cat. So Jess, let me just find you in the room here. So many of you, thank you all for being here. Here we go. Hi there.
Hey.
So a baker by trade, how lovely. Can you talk and so you've opened you've had your own bakery and cafe since 2013, but then you say you turn to writing at every stage of life as a means of self-expression. Can you talk about these 2 really disparate parts of yourself? And I'm curious, like, do they ever, I don't know, do you ever find yourself inspired with the work that you're doing kind of as a baker?
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question. My professional life intersects with writing in that writing sort of helps me make sense of my professional life as well. And I do sort of write more like pieces in line with my professional life, so blogs and articles and stuff like that. But creatively, I feel like my writing has always occupied this sort of very private sphere. So being here tonight is like a pretty big deal to me.
That's great. So when you heard about this anthology, or or if there was a call for submissions or stuff, did you know what you wanted to submit right away? It had been something that you've been working on, or how did you figure out what you wanted to kind of write for this anthology?
Yeah, so I guess I've been working on a memoir for the last like year and a half. And I've been also, I got in touch with Monica Meneghetti, who's here today, and she's actually the person who told me about the anthology and kind of gave me the nudge to consider submitting, which is something that, like, had somebody not nudged me to do, I certainly wouldn't have done. Because, you know, first of all, it's really challenging to put yourself out there creatively, but also like in a space that feels very, I don't know, like I never thought I would be occupying a queer Italian writing space. So, you know, and in order to, I guess I've been working on a memoir, and I'd started writing some work about my grandmother, who I had a hard time figuring out how to sort of write about her, because the feelings around writing about her were pretty raw. But once I started, that sort of felt like the natural sort of topic to submit on. So that's what I submitted.
Well, I'm glad that Monica nudged you, and I'm glad that you submitted. So very excited to hear you read. So the floor is yours, Jess.
Cool. So yeah, I'm reading a piece tonight called Homesick. I won't have time to read the whole thing, but I'm reading you an excerpt, and it is a piece of nonfiction. It's sort of a sketch of my life alongside my grandmother's life. And there is some Italian in the story, so I'm hoping everyone, like people who don't understand Italian, can still follow along. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and for everybody for inviting me today. All right. I am 4. It is my birthday, and there's a Sesame Street themed cake, a pile of presents, and a smattering of cousins. I unwrap each present with swiftness and enthusiasm until the very last one. I can tell by the look in my mother's eyes that this gift was a special one. Even though I can't read yet, I know that it's a Nintendo console just by looking at the box. Just when I think this day can't get any better, I notice that Nonna doesn't drive home with my aunt and uncle. Why isn't Nonna going home? I ask my mother as we stand outside on the hot July day. Because she'll be living with us now. A wave of delight washes over me at the thought of spending every day with my beloved grandmother. This was surely the best birthday gift ever. I quickly learn that the perks of living with Nonna are plentiful. I don't really like mornings, but she has a gentle way of waking me up. Most mornings, she opens my bedroom door quietly and fills the room with music. As she sings, she walks through the room and slowly raises the curtains, letting rays of sunshine in, never too suddenly. Her singing voice is gentle, soothing, and a little bit shaky. La brava bambina appena si svegliata, si lava la faccia, le mani, le braccia, si mette il vestito e va diretta a scuola. As soon as my eyelids are open, she asks, "Cosa vuoi mangiare per colazione?" I'm 7. We're looking through the atlas together in our living room, and she shows me all of the countries my grandfather landed in during the war. I listen intently because I want to remember every word she says. When old people tell you stories, you're supposed to pay attention, I think to myself. One day they'll be gone, and it'll be up to me to remember all of this. My mother is puttering around the entrance of the house, tidying up. She leans against the doorway of the living room and implores, "Ma, please speak to the kids in Italian, not in dialect." It was her fruitless attempt to ensure we weren't confused by the constant switching between regional dialect and standard tongue. "Oh, sì, Nonna replies, with a barely perceptible eye roll. Nonna explains to me that she was allowed to stay in school until she was 10 years old, unlike so many of her generation, and so she became fully literate in standard Italian. 5 minutes later, she slips back into her dialect, and I'm not sure that she notices. I like it better this way anyway. I won't tell Mom. I'm 12. I cling to her more and more these days. Her hair has changed from gray to white, and I sense her fragility. I can also sense that she's longing for connection and a sense of belonging. I notice that she sometimes tries to keep up with conversations that happen in English, but most of the time she seems to be somewhere else. I wonder what that must feel like. What is she thinking about in those moments around the dinner table? What alternative reality is she longing for? She seems lonely, or maybe homesick. After a boisterous, mostly English-speaking dinner with the family, she watches a game show and I curl up next to her on the couch. I just want her to know that I love her. Our hands resting together are an anchor. I hope that in holding her hand, she understands that I belong to her and her to me. Tue mani sono fredde come una morta, she points out, while nesting my hands to warm them up. I chuckle at her statement and think of it as a bit dramatic. Tonight is like most nights. She goes upstairs to her bedroom around 8 o'clock. I crack open her bedroom door about an hour later to see what she's doing. She's praying the rosary quietly to herself. I can hear her whispering the prayers under her breath. Her very vintage TV is on too. It's turned to Omni for the Italian language news. She catches me gazing up at her. Entra, siediti qua. She gestures me towards her bed. Truth be told, I wanted company too. Being around her was very simple. Something about our friendship just felt pure, as though nothing could complicate it. I want to lay on her bed for hours and be wrapped up in stories of her homeland. In doing that, she makes me feel at home too. Ours feels like a simple love, even though I'm starting to know, ours feels like a simple love. Even though I'm starting to notice that I might be different from other kids my age, I worry about what it all means. I never worry about whether she would stop loving me. I don't know how I know this, I just do. We realize we've been talking for over an hour, so I get up to let her sleep. Grazie, Jess, ne avevo bisogno, she tells me, as I kiss her cheek goodnight. Buonanotte, nonna. I'm 19. She confides in me more and more these days when something isn't right. We're in the car together. I'm driving her back to my uncle's house where she is spending this year. She describes how she feels alienated living with him now that he's remarried. His new stepkids mock her, and she knows it, even though she can't understand the exact meaning of the words they use. I hug her tiny body a little extra tightly when we pull into the driveway this time. I'll see you next Saturday, Nonna. Se Dio vuole. I punch my step-cousin at a bar the next time I run into him. I'm 24. I walk through the front doors of our suburban Ottawa home after a day at university. Nana is sitting in the family room crocheting another potholder. They're a far cry from the clothing she once made, but they are still exquisite. This is the third one she's made this week. Devo restare occupata, she tells me. They're beautiful, I assure her. She puts her needle and yarn down and plants her palms to the couch, trying once to get up, and then a second time. Her bones are stiff, achy, and full of arthritis. Come lunga la vita, preghiamo per una sana morte. A good death. Those words swirl in my mind every time she says them. I imagine what she must mean by them. Maybe she means she wants to die suddenly or peacefully. It sounds to me that on some level she's ready. Maybe it means that she's seen all she needed to see, understand all that she needed to understand, and lost all she could stand to lose. I'm 27. I pull up to the nursing home where Nonna lives now, walk the long hallway towards the elevator, and adjust as best as I can to the medicinal smell of the building. I walk up to her door and she is sitting in her chair. Her eyes light up when she sees me. She gestures to the edge of her bed and tells me to sit as she repositions her chair to face me. We slip into our chatty habits right away. She pauses for a moment mid-conversation, looks me in the eyes, and states with an air of confidence, "Ma tu sei innamorata?" I'm stunned. I'm 2 months into dating my girlfriend, who is certainly putting a spring in my step. But was it that obvious? She doesn't ask me any questions about my new relationship. Maybe she knows we won't have the vocabulary. I tell her yes, and she says she's happy for me. That is the end of the conversation. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jess.
Mm.
That was beautiful. The way you captured the very simple bond and conversations between a grandchild and a grandparent, and like those sort of flyé statements they make sometimes, like "Preghiamo una sana morte," you know, "Che lunga la vita," just these things that sort of come out that are morbid and absurd and warm all at the same time because they're from our grandparents. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
Our next reader is Daniel Zomparelli. He is the author of Davy Street Translations and rom-com co-written with Dina Del Bucchia. His collection of short stories, Everything is Awful and You're a Terrible Person, was nominated for the Ethel Wilson Fiction Prize and won the Relit Short Fiction Award. Daniel, thanks for being here this evening.
Thanks for having me.
How do you, because looking at, first of all, your titles are fantastic.
Thank you.
And I was wondering, how do you decide which stories you're going to tell as poems and which you'll tell as fiction? And how do you feel that exploring your identity, whether it's queer or Italian Canadian, is different depending on those genres? Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Very difficult question. So when it comes to poetry versus fiction, I usually just jot down some notes of what I'm thinking about. And so Everything is Awful and You're a Terrible Person was actually originally a poem. And that kind of broke out, and then it became a story, and it really changes piece to piece. And sorry, also my dog is gonna leave us. Say bye to my dog. And when it comes to Italian, the Italianness is like coming back in this way that I was very fearful of using in the first part of my writing, or my first couple books. Less so than the queerness. The queerness was like really at the front, and it took me a long time to understand that part, they were all together in a part together. So like now as my work goes on, those kind of things are kind of meeting at a point, no longer being like one's what or one's the other. Same with, actually, I would say poetry and fiction. I'm realizing that I don't like to split things off into genre, just as I don't like to split things off into identity, and it's all kind of creating largely unpopular work.
It sounds like a great convergence of all the different elements. What are you going to be reading?
I have two poems from the anthology. And I realized that both are about depression. So, but don't worry, the third one in the anthology is about grief. So I've really broken it up into sorrow and sadness. Also, Jess, I just wanted to say thank you for that piece. I now am very longing for my nonna in a way that was very well and beautifully written. Thank you. So I'm going to start with, sorry, that's it for questions, right?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to start with one called Selfie. Hands are invisible in a photo made by impression. You take a photo of yourself for me and us. Smiles are decoded for multiple takes. I took a photo of myself to mark my age, or I took several photos of myself to see what depression looks like. When you were alive, I hid behind you in a photo to protect myself. Someone told me that a photo takes something away from you, and I believed them. So there is this photo of you with my tiny legs poking behind. I can take this photo of myself now, but the ghost of you blurs my image. Wipe the lens and refocus. That is a poem about a photo that I found of my mom where I was hidden behind her, because I did genuinely believe photos take a bit of you, and still have a fear of photography. And then this one is called Lasagna Slow, and this is supposed to be an instructional sonnet. What you will need. The way depression rounds our bodies, and this too is love. Crushed tomatoes, garlic, basil, ricotta, mozzarella, ways to stay. Start here where garlic pressed into you, oil crackles. I want to say this is about the time it takes for me to pour 2 cans of tomatoes crushed. Stir basil, wait. Nostalgia is a time construct you can't count in pasta sheets, layer. Cheese is the quickest way to a man's heart, melt. Cook for 30 minutes at 350. Let me tell you why this is how I say I love you, because bubbling over, I never was very good at spoken words. And that one is about using lasagna to get dick. That's my poor Nana. She's just like up in heaven, like, why are you doing this?
Thank you, Daniel.
That's it.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. It was such a wonderful reading tonight. So excited to hear everybody read, and I'm so excited to read all the submissions in the anthology. I don't know how many works are in the final one, but I think it's more than 35 writers. And so thank you everyone for reading today, and thank you all for joining us. So let's give a big virtual round of applause, well, real round of applause to our readers: Jess Carpinone, Elio Iannacci, Anna Nobile, and Daniel Zomparelli, as well as Domenico Beneventi. Thanks, Dominic, for being here for that. If you like what you hear, if we ask you to please show your support and pre-order the book through Glad Day. And I want to thank Tiana and the group at Glad Day too for hosting us tonight.
So thanks again to all of our readers and for everybody who joined us here this evening, and to Chris for your reading as well. Don't forget to mark your calendars. Other events featuring the contributors to Here and Now, an anthology of queer Italian Canadian writing, are coming up. The next one will be Saturday, June 5th at 2:15 p.m. There's the Roundtable, Literary Performances and Discussion with Queer Italian Canadians. So taking part in that will be Licia Canton, Elena Basile, Anthony Bonato, Christy Rado, Nikki Donadio, Paolo Frasca, Steph Mendolia, Monica Meneghetti, and myself. So that's on June 5th, on Saturday.
And then, of course, there is the official book launch, the Frank, I apologize, I'm going to have trouble pronouncing this. I should have asked you, Licia. Iacobucci, Center for Italian Canadian Studies at the University of Toronto, and Accenti Magazine present the official launch of the book on Tuesday, June 22nd at 5 p.m. You'll be able to join a conversation with the editor, queer studies scholars, and contributors. The event takes place on Zoom, and it's free, and all are welcome. You can register at, and I will put this link into the chat right here. So feel free to copy that and sign up. And yeah, so thank you all. I hope everyone's doing okay and has a wonderful evening, and hopefully we will see you at the next event.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.